Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela Wall. I'm a staff attorney here at Sally. Um, I'm honored to be here today to talk to you all about ethics, confidentiality, and advocate testimony. So the objectives for today is to allow you to define confidentiality versus privilege, decide when to release client records, know the difference between an expert witness and a fact witness, feel more comfortable about testifying in court, and then know how not to commit the unauthorized practice of law.
Thank you.
So, confidentiality versus privilege. Both protect a survivor's privacy, specifically the communications made between professionals and the survivor. The major difference is that confidentiality protects communications being disclosed to a third party in any context, whereas privilege also protects communications from being disclosed in court or in a deposition. Not everything that is confidential is privileged, but everything that is privileged is confidential, meaning that you can't disclose to third parties, but you can disclose things in the court. Okay, so who is covered under confidentiality and privilege? Different types of professional relationships have different types of or levels of protection. Under confidentiality, it's medical providers, mental health providers, advocates, attorneys, and then some grant recipients. Under privilege, you'll see that there is some overlap. So mental health professionals and attorneys also have privilege. Also clergy, spouses have privilege. There are certain types of laws that allow spouses to not have to testify against each other in court. And then the self-incrimination is a form of privilege. So the sources of like what gives us the ability to have confidentiality and privilege. So confidentiality comes from professional ethical rules. It also comes from professional licensing and organizations' internal policies. Grants requirements, certain grant requirements have certain confidentiality requirements, and then state and federal law. Privilege specifically comes from law. So there is a law at state level as well as federal level that gives us privilege. So the Violence Against Women's Act, which a lot of us work under, also has is a source of confidentiality. So here it says, in order to ensure the safety of adults, youth, and child victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, and their families, grantees and subgrantees under this subchapter shall protect the confidentiality and privacy of persons receiving services. So there are no exceptions under the Violence Against Women's Act. So that means that when writing grant reports, collaborating with other organizations, or sharing any internal data, you cannot violate confidentiality. Under VAWA, also a parent or guardian can provide releases of information for unemancipated minors, but not if they are the alleged abuser. So under VAWA, there is no privilege VAWA provisions do not protect against court orders or subpoenas. So essentially, if you are receive a court order or a subpoena to come and testify, you can't claim privilege under VAWA, meaning that unless there's something else that gives you some kind of privilege, you would be required to testify. If information must be disclosed, VAWA requires that the providers attempt to notify the client before disclosing. So both confidentiality and privilege belong to the patient or client, and not the advocate themselves. And generally, only the patient or client can waive confidentiality or privilege. So to give you permission to release that information. There are some exceptions, which are mandatory reporters, for example. I would recommend consulting with your organization or an attorney to determine whether or not you are a mandatory reporter. Not all service providers are mandatory reporters. For example, I am not a mandatory reporter. Another exception is people under the age of 18, depending on the situation. And then depending on what profession you're dealing with, there may be some other exceptions. So if a client or patient decides to waive confidentiality or privilege, it is an all or nothing situation. So they cannot pick and choose what information you can and cannot give. So this is a trigger warning. I'm going to read out an example. So Maria wants the Rape Crisis Center advocate to give expert testimony that Maria's husband physically and sexually abused their 6-year-old daughter, but not that Maria waited a month to go to the police after she found out. Here, Maria doesn't have an option if she waives privilege or confidentiality. That Rape Crisis Center advocate would be able to disclose information about both Maria and her husband, especially if they're asked. So why have privilege? Privilege encourages free and effective communication between a survivor and whatever professional that they're working with. It also protects children, and there is a constitutional right to confront witnesses. So privilege kind of works against that constitutional right and protecting certain information when someone is using their right to confront witnesses. It's also designed to encourage people to seek out services. If people think that information will be discoverable, they're less likely to seek services, causing them, further harm because issues are not being addressed. So there's something that we have dubbed Uber privilege. There are certain records that are given this kind of Uber privilege that include records of attorneys or clergy. Other records like medical or mental health records do not reach this Uber privilege status because they're seen as more likely to be relevant, and any damage by breaking privilege and allowing them to be brought up in court is less important. So if you have been given permission to release confidential information from the survivor, you will want to obtain a written release. When you do need to obtain a written release from a survivor, you should use a HIPAA compliant model release. Most organizations have these. Depending on the specific information that is being released in the records, there may be some special requirements that you have to follow. Some other providers will have their own release of information documents. but I would, use whatever is available to your organization. If your organization has one, use that. So, if you are being asked to release information, how do you respond to a request for records? So contact your survivor, ask what they want, talk to them about it. You certainly want to make them aware that someone is asking for their records. You also want to get informed consent from them. So talk to them about the pros and cons of releasing information. Some pros can be that it supports their case, especially if there is corroborating information in these records. It can also strengthen any claim that they have. You also want to talk about cons, loss of privacy. Like I said before, waiving confidentiality and privilege is an all or nothing thing. So they can't just, release beneficial records. It can affect precedent for releasing future records for, similar services. Make sure to inform your survivor that this is a voluntary release. They do not have to, allow for a release to happen. You also cannot require a client to release information in order to receive services. And you want to make sure that everything is written. So any kind of release that you're getting is a written release. So like I said before, you would want to use a HIPAA compliant model release. There are certain specific requirements for different types of information that's being released. So for like drug treatment, it's federally protected, so you need a specific release. HIV and AIDS status also needs a specific release. Sometimes when you ask for information, that provider may have records from other providers. You want to address this separately. So, specifying in the release whether or not you want all and any information they have from them as a provider and any other providers that they have gathered information from, or if you just want, what they have from their organization. We recommend that you do not accept releases from other agencies. You want to provide your own. And then consider requiring conversations with clients to ensure voluntary informed consent when trying to obtain a written release. So these are just the pros and cons that I discussed before. Like I said, pros is it provides corroborating evidence. Also, a survivor's refusal to waive confidentiality may lead the court to think that there is some kind of damaging information in that survivor's case. And then cons, lack of privacy, and then the total waiver. So what do you do if you have received a subpoena? You want to notify your supervisor or your legal counsel immediately. If you receive a subpoena, it is urgent. There is no waiting on this. Especially since if you notify, legal counsel, they're going to try to see if this is something that they can fight. Do not turn over any records, even if the person with the subpoena tells you to. You want to not only contact legal counsel and your supervisor, but also figure out what the survivor wants and talk to them. So when responding to a subpoena, there are special requirements. In a criminal case, the defense counsel must notify both the victim and the prosecutor of a subpoena for medical records. HIPAA and state law require notice to a patient and reasonable time to file a motion to quash when healthcare records are involved. A motion to quash is a motion requesting that the court state that the information requested does not need to be disclosed and is actually protected. So that goes into, legal counsel fighting a subpoena and why it is so important to notify your supervisor and legal counsel as soon as you receive a subpoena. And then financial records are also require notice of a subpoena. So if you receive a subpoena, you'll want to contact an attorney. Your agency may have an attorney that they specifically go to, or you may have a legal department in your organization. That attorney, when they are notified of your subpoena, will need certain information. So that includes a copy of the subpoena, a copy of the records. They'll want to review it to make sure if there's anything that shouldn't be revealed to hurt the survivor. They'll also want the service provider's credentials, the supervisor's credentials, any grant supporting services, and then date records or testimony is also required. So we are now going to move on to advocate testimony. This is a picture from My Cousin Vinny. If you haven't seen it, it's a great movie. Highly recommend it. So when you all testify in court, you are either considered an expert witness or a fact witness, depending on the type of information that you're testifying to. So an expert witness, they have some kind of special knowledge that the average person does not have because they have training in the field. So they are there to help educate the judge or jury, in a lot of our cases about domestic and sexual violence. And you can also offer, expert opinions about the specific case. If you're a fact witness, you are being asked questions because you have personal knowledge about what happened. So what you actually observed. So for example, like personal knowledge of the services that have been provided to the survivor, and how they might have responded to those services. As an advocate, you can be both an expert witness and a fact witness. So some helpful topics if you are testifying as an expert witness, talking about the cycle of violence, talking about delayed reporting, and then the effects of trauma. Like I said before, you're technically there to educate the fact finder, so that's the judge or the jury, and these are sometimes topics that you'll be asked to talk about. Unfortunately, we have a legal system that doesn't understand the complicated intricacies of trauma and abuse, and so that's why we do have expert witnesses come in. Some helpful topics that you might testify to if you're considered a fact witness. So any observations of the survivor that you've made, any observations of the opposing party, and then observations of any minor children and their interactions with their parents. So when you are doing your job and recording things, it's kind of a good idea to keep your records in a way that will help you if you do get a future subpoena. So anything that you're writing down, you want to give context to, especially any like quote bad facts. It's better to have those bad facts in the record than have to explain them on the witness stand. So for example, if you just write, in your records, client appears to be an alcoholic, that doesn't give, much context to what's going on, and you'd be required to testify and to explain that. It would be better if your record says, for example, as is typical of many sexual assault survivors, client self-medicates with alcohol. Sorry, let me go back real quick. So it's better that the records themselves are good enough on their own. That doesn't mean that you won't be required to testify. But it's good to have them in both places to kind of corroborate everything that you're saying. So why might you want to testify in a case as an advocate? So some pros, you are a fact witness. You can corroborate the survivor's version of events. Anything that you have directly observed. So if there are questions about how they're, behaving after an incident, anything that you might have observed can be relevant. You are also an expert. You can help explain a survivor's behavior and minimize, victim blaming by a judge or jury. Going back to, the fact that a lot of our court systems still adhere to the ideas still adhere to ideas about survivors and abuse that might be outdated. Some cons, though, to testifying as an advocate is that you are testifying to things that a survivor might consider as private. And going back to, it's an all or nothing situation if they waive privilege or confidentiality. You're also subjected to cross-examination by the perpetrator's attorney. Cross-examination is not fun. It's meant to discredit you. And so it can be jarring, especially, if it's your first time. There are also limitations as a fact witness on what you can testify to. Courts have to follow strict evidence laws that dictate what can and cannot be used in a court case. And so things like hearsay, you can't testify to what somebody else said unless there's an exception, and that can really limit you in what you testify to and how you testify. So if you are being asked to testify, how can you prepare? So review your records only if advised by counsel. Provide your resume if testifying as an expert witness. Don't use your home address and make sure that your resume is up to date. If appropriate, talk to the attorney who's calling you as a witness about what they plan to ask you. If you have, or if your organization has an attorney, you can also talk to them or have them reach out. So tips for testifying: stay calm. Just answer the question that is being asked, especially if you are on cross. I always suggest taking a beat before you answer any questions. So allow the attorney to ask the question, take a minute, and then testify. This also allows attorneys to object without cutting you off. Don't guess. So if you don't know the answer to a question, just say that you don't know or that you don't recall it at this time. Also, don't play lawyer. Don't argue with the attorney who's asking you questions. Leave that up to, the other counsel. And then talk to the judge or jury. They are the fact finders. They are the ones who are going to be making a decision. And so when you're testifying, you essentially want to talk to them. So I mentioned objections before. If you hear the word objection, stop talking. This means that someone believes that the question that is being asked or the answer that is being given is not appropriate. It doesn't follow the rules of evidence. And so the attorneys will hash that out with the judge. If you hear the word sustained, that means that you cannot answer the question. The judge has determined that it is, in fact, an inappropriate statement or question. If you hear the word overruled, that means that you can go ahead and answer the question. If you're not sure, you simply just have to ask. You can also ask the attorney to repeat the question if you don't remember it. And then make sure you understand the question. Like I said before, it's okay to ask the attorney to repeat or clarify any questions. So testifying in court, it's not a conversation. They're going to ask you specific questions that they need answered. If you are on direct examination, so you're being asked questions by the attorney who called you, those questions will be open. So they'll ask you, like, who, what, where, when, and why questions. It allows you to give some kind of narrative. Cross-examination questions, so questions being asked by the opposing counsel, those are a lot more direct. They typically elicit, yes or no answers, and can they're meant to trip you up. They're meant to discredit you. And so, like I said before, taking a beat before you answer. When you're answering questions, be careful and accurate. Don't agree just to be polite. Like I said before, make sure that you're concentrating on what question is being asked, especially on cross. So it's important to understand that when we are releasing information or testifying in one case, it can affect victims and survivors in future cases. So trigger warning, for example, in a county with only one judge, an advocate agrees to testify as a fact witness about Valerie's sexual assault and as an expert witness about delayed reporting. This judge will likely then take that information that you've testified to and apply it to other cases in the future. So, just understanding that you're kind of setting a precedent when you testify, which is okay. We want to educate judges, but just acknowledging that is important. So, ethics. When you are an advocate, you have a lot of information that you know about concerning the law. You are not attorneys, and so we want to make sure that you are not practicing law without being authorized to. So you have all of this information. What can you do with that information as an advocate or as a non-attorney? You can provide victims with basic information about the existence of legal rights and remedies. You can provide victims with basic information about judicial proceedings and how they typically run. You can also assist victims in preparing certain legal documents when they're preparing them on their own behalf. By defining, unfamiliar terms on the form, explaining where on a form the victim provides certain information. If the victim is asking you to write anything, you need to write it verbatim. So whatever the victim is saying, put that on the form. And then you may be able to sit with the victim at the table during a court proceeding. You would just ask permission from the judge. They'll probably ask you who you are and what your role is and why you're asking to sit up there. It's ultimately up to the judge whether or not you can sit with the victim, but it doesn't hurt to ask if that's what the survivor victim would like. So what can't you do? So you cannot provide advice relating to a victim's rights or remedies. You can't suggest them pursuing a specific remedy or using a certain right that they have as a victim. You can't provide information about the legal aspects of a judicial system. So, for example, how to present a case, how to call a witness, how to ask questions of the witness, how to introduce evidence. You cannot use your own language when you're preparing or filling out documents for a client. That goes back to, making sure that you write down verbatim what the victim said. This is important because the victim is certifying that what is said in the form is at their own words and is true. And so if you're using language that they don't typically use, it would probably cause some confusion in court when they are required to go up and testify. And then you also cannot engage in advocacy before any governmental representative on behalf of an individual victim. So that is the end of my section. If any of you have any questions or want to discuss anything, you are more than welcome to call Sally. Our number is on there. MCASA's number is also on there, or you can email us. The Sally email is Sally, SALI.info, info@mcasa.org. If you want to reach us specifically, it's also on our website. You just let us know, what you're calling about, and an advocate will get you to the appropriate person. Let me make sure that our next person is here. Give me 1 second.
Hello. I think I'm the next person. I don't know if can you hear me? Kayla, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Give me a moment. I'm gonna pull up my slides here and share my slides. There it is. Awesome. Okay. Is this working? It's working. Okay. So good morning. My name is Juan Luis Ayllon Quiroz. I am senior legal advocate with Sally, our Sexual Assault Legal Institute. Sally, you probably heard about this already, but we're the legal arm of the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Our office consists of a team of lawyers that serve survivors of sexual assault. And then me and my team as legal advocates, we are the first point of contact with our office when survivors call, when survivors get referred to us. We assist with client intakes, all kinds of office tasks to keep our law office running, and we do well, I do a lot of translation and interpretation for our Spanish-speaking clients. Today I'm going to be talking about safety planning, risk assessment, a little bit about cyber stalking. This stuff is definitely related to our day-to-day functions working with survivors. Safety planning is something we do with every new case that we get as part of our intake process. It makes sure that we want to make sure that our client is in a safe position, in a good position to be helped. Because if they're, I don't know, around their abuser or somewhere where they don't have privacy or whatever else is happening, they wouldn't be able to even call us in the first place. So let's first start with some kind of a definition. What is safety planning? A safety plan is a survivor's individualized plan developed in partnership with an advocate that focuses on strategies for staying safe. It is typically used for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. In creating a safety plan, advocates discuss the unique needs and circumstances of individual victims. And just for your information, you may see the term safety planning in other settings. They also use safety planning slightly differently in the mental health field when talking about people who may be at risk of self-harm or suicidal ideation. In this case, we're talking about sexual assault survivors and the risk from external threats, threats to their safety from someone who could potentially do something to them. So safety planning, like I said, is something we do regularly as part of our intakes. If our client is not physically safe, they may not be in position to access services at all in the first place. So that is very important part of our work. Now, what is our objective when safety planning? Why do advocates safety plan? The idea is to reduce the risk of further harm to the best of our ability within, the limitations of our role in a person's life. What I mean is that I'm not physically right there in their home. I can't exactly physically stop anything bad from happening to them. So there's that limitation, but and safety planning is not a guarantee of safety, but we do what we can, from our desks through the phone to try to help someone help themselves, give them a sense of what are their options and resources available to them. So we want to identify individual risk factors. We have a conversation with a survivor to figure out what are possible risks. That can be things in their immediate surroundings, their relationship with a perpetrator. It can be a whole host of different considerations. It can mean, nationality. It can mean citizenship status or economic circumstances. Any number of things can play into that. We also want to increase protective factors. So that you want to think about what are their support networks, what type of resources they have in their immediate physical surroundings and beyond. Another objective is if another crisis happens, to reduce their stress during that crisis. So by giving someone a sense of what are their options and their resources when something does happen, it helps to know that, if this would happen, this is what I could do. The person has already in their mind run through different scenarios and can develop some notion of what are their options in that situation. And we seek empowerment for survivors. We want to give people the sense of that they're in control, agency over their safety as much as possible after a violation, so that they feel that they have options and they're not just, you know, a victim at the mercy of what a perpetrator might be trying to do to them, or whatever else might happen to them. So helping survivors of sexual assaults. Generally speaking, there's a number of scenarios that where sexual assault survivors may have to navigate their safety. I have some different examples here that I'm gonna discuss or present in a moment. Different settings where sexual assault survivors may have to navigate their safety. If you can think of others, because I can't possibly cover every scenario, you would just want to apply similar troubleshooting thought process to the survivor, and work with the survivor to figure out what to do in that situation. So here I have a picture of some kind of school campus. That's one environment where you might have to work with a survivor if you work with students. A perpetrator can often be in that setting. It could be a classmate on a college campus, or somebody they know through a friend group, or it could even be a faculty member. It could be friends of friends, someone from a dorm. And so you would want to talk to a survivor to think about what are the resources available at hand in that particular setting. That might include classmates, it might include friends, teachers, counselors, resource officers, um, different type of personnel depending on the particular school setting. Another type of environment that we might encounter would be the workplace. Unfortunately, it's very common that I see it a lot in my Spanish-speaking clients, that they're abused by a supervisor or some kind of workplace environment. Workplaces are very different, of course, depending on what the person is doing. But there's resources to consider there. Can include other coworkers, a trusted coworker, a supervisor, human resources departments may be available depending on the type of workplace. Often not in with my Spanish speaking clients, but depending on the type of workplace, that's an option. Then that's a depiction of a living room. So the home is also a place, unfortunately, where the abuse may take place, and where the survivor might have to figure out their safety options. Often the abuser can be a spouse, a parent, in the household, sometimes a housemate, in shared living spaces like that. So we definitely in that situation want to think about the immediate physical safety, and about ways to be, if there's an abuser in the same home, ways to be discreet around the abuser when seeking help to avoid any further violence or retaliation, or any reporting or any action that the survivor might want to take. And resources available there would include a family member or a neighbor, friends, again, law enforcement in case of emergency, if that's something that the survivor is interested in pursuing, and everywhere else. So these are just a few examples, but while there are some common situations, every safety plan and every conversation we have with the survivor always has to be different and tailored to the particular circumstances and details of their case and their situation. So I can't really say that there's a particular formula. I always have to remain adaptable to what their concerns are. They're the expert on their situation. So Give me one moment. Okay. When we're thinking about safety planning, we definitely want to think about the ways different identities, different personal experiences might affect um, their situation. So depending on the type of clients that you work with, the geographic area that you serve, you may come into contact with survivors from different types of backgrounds um, in your work. And so by nature of being from a minority populations, some survivors may face really serious barriers to get help after victimization. One example that comes to mind to me is our Spanish-speaking clients. Most of them, um, they're first generation undocumented immigrants. They don't speak English very well, if at all. So in that situation, if somebody's the victim of a crime, they're in a foreign country, the police and the courts and services don't speak your language or don't speak it very well, it can be very difficult to seek help in that situation. Now, if the abuser then is also a member of the same community, which is usually the case as well, um, or even an intimate partner or a family member, which is also very common, that makes it very hard to escape as a member of a relatively small community where more or less everybody knows everybody else and everybody talks to each other. So this applies to small communities of every kind, not just immigrant groups that don't speak English. Also, people from rural areas um, might have similar type of social, at some degree of isolation. People from certain communities of color, um, sexual minorities may feel unsafe, maybe around police officers, or generally distrust law enforcement or the state. Some people may feel that they are less likely to be believed as victims due to their race, their sexual orientation, their sex. Um, on the other hand, there's also economic status that can be a determining factor. Um, for example, a survivor with no income source would have a very difficult time leaving a abuser if they depend on them financially for their survival. Um, a person who is struggling with poverty may not be able to leave a job where they're facing sexual discrimination or harassment in the workplace. Um, they may not be able to afford to pay a phone bill so that they have access to, the ability to call us or call someone for help. So safety is more than just avoiding physical acts of violence, and some people can have a harder time achieving that, accessing that. In theory, we may all be able to use the same resources, but accessing them in practice can be difficult. It can be difficult in a second language, or it can be difficult after you have to work your 2 shifts, or if you're struggling with even finding homelessness, having a roof over your head. Now, on the subject of intersectionality, I should also mention I want to talk about the ways that different identities, or I guess different experiences, um, can not only hurt someone, but they can also uh, offer advantages and strengths to somebody. The other side of that coin. Um, so this may seem obvious, but in my experience, survivors that don't struggle with English can feel a lot more comfortable or less uncomfortable um, if they have to interact with the system, with law enforcement or the courts. If you speak their language, that'll be a lot easier. A person with the safety and security of a middle class income, may be able to afford to, um, in case of emergency, you know, stretch out their resources, but they may be able to afford to relocate to a different apartment, a different neighborhood, a different city for their safety. Personally, um, I'm Spanish speaking, first generation immigrant. I am perceived as, I'm not white in this country, but I wouldn't be at you know, the intersections matter. So um, I have, um, I did grow up in a middle class background, and the fact that I have a college education, I can speak English, um, that affords me, great access to things if I was in that situation. Um, so it's not a that one thing determines um, outcomes, but they intersect and affect um, each other. So I have the great privilege that I can afford to. I have a job. I can afford to go visit my family in Peru sometimes. And the disadvantages maybe is that I get randomly selected to, when I'm coming back from traveling, I get randomly selected to look through my baggage. I think more often than most people. Um, which is, a tiny little first world problem, but I'm sure we can think of different ways, different examples of how our personal um, intersecting identities might create different outcomes, different experiences. Um, the last thing I want to say about intersectionality is you can't possibly know everything about every type of identity or every type of person that can exist. And the important thing that I try to keep in mind in my work is that I try to approach people with an open mind and humility. So I try to be aware of my own privileges. I try to be mindful of where I'm coming from and not assume things about people. Um, and yeah, when talking about their life and their experiences, I'm ready to listen and adapt to what they might need. Um, so I maybe in the case of if I have, for example, somebody from an Indian woman, I can't imagine what that is like if she's being abused by her spouse and thinking about leaving him, and how everyone in her life might disown her if she were to do that. That I have come across that type of situation when safety planning, but I can listen. I'm not an expert on that, but I can listen and offer think through her situation and try to offer resources to help her make it safely and make it safely to the other side and be able to access um, resources and safety. Um, so that's my spiel on intersectionality. Um, Now I want to talk about risk assessment. Um, it's basically analyzing a person's situation to identify potential hazards and to try to anticipate what could happen if some kind of hazard does occur. Um, so questions in the slide are some things that can be helpful to discuss when trying to explore and to brainstorm through possible scenarios. Um, for example, are you safe now? Is it safe to contact you? This is so that we can have a baseline sense of the safety situation. Um, the first time a survivor reaches out to us, calls our office, we confirm that the phone number that they're giving us, that it's safe to call them there. Um, it's safe to leave a voice message at that number, so no one else is checking their voice messages. And if we're calling, when somebody answers the phone, or if we're leaving a voice message, is it safe to say that we're calling from the Sexual Assault Legal Institute? Or is it safe to say that we're calling from Sally? So just one example of ways we can accommodate for different situations. Is it safe to contact um, via mail? Like, is it safe to send any documents to their home address, send any letters or anything related to the case at the address that they provide? Or is there, the risk that someone might that an abuser might see that, or that it might be intercepted somehow? Um, So that's another thing we screen for and consider. Then the other questions, give us more information to explore the particular landscape of their situation. The next three questions, have you seen or had any contact with the perpetrator? And what are ways that you might come into contact with the perpetrator? Has they contacted your friends or family? They to have a sense of what is the specific frequency of contact or how present the perpetrator is in that particular person's life, or in their situation. We also want to get a sense of what are their life routines and times of the day, times of the week, or different places where they may run into their abuser or run the risk of harm from their perpetrator. So does the perpetrator know where you live, where you work, where you go to school, that type of thing, where you buy your groceries or go to the bank? These questions help us get a sense of what are the risks. And for each possible answer to these questions, for each possible risk, we can try to help a survivor come up with different contingency plans for each type of potential situation. And again, everyone's life is different, so we're going to have to be adaptable and brainstorm based on the specifics of their life, their schedules, their activities, their job, whatever it might be. So in terms of safety planning, I want to review some specific tips for the specific scenario where the survivor is at home and under attack from somebody. This can come up especially in cases where this is a domestic violence situation or a housemate, or they live in the same household. If you're home and under attack, stay away from kitchen or places with weapons. Small spaces where a perpetrator could trap you. So I don't know if these things are obvious, but when I first learned about this stuff, I learned that our first instinct is to, or I was told that one common scenario was that a survivor might, their instinct would be to run away from the threat and try to maybe grab a knife or put some sort of barrier between themselves and the abuser or assailant. So like go into a bathroom and lock the door, or into a closet or something. And sometimes that can end up with the survivor safe but trapped and has no way of getting out or seeking help, or calling anyone or doing anything. So this is one thing that we do bring up if there's some kind of risk in the home. I always try to get people during safety planning to take inventory mentally of what are their options at home for different entrances or exits to the house, which rooms have maybe a window to climb out of in the worst case scenario, or if there's a back door or that type of thing, an escape ladder or a fire exit, whatever it may be. So yeah, go to a room with a door or window to escape, go to a room with a phone, or where you have the ability to call for help. If this is something that a survivor feels safe doing and comfortable, there's always calling 911, calling law enforcement. And when they do that, it's important to provide their specific address information and to try to get the dispatcher's information, name or ID number, in case you were to need it later, or if you need to call back and reach the same person. Yeah, it can be helpful for reference to have that information. Although, of course, in that moment of crisis, that might not be what you think of, but if they happen to be able to do that, it doesn't hurt. So other things to consider when it comes to being safe at home. Safe places might include a neighbor, a friend, a family member that lives close by. It can mean your local church, your police station, your domestic violence shelter. It's probably a good idea to know to memorize what are the routes to near safe places. Changing the locks on doors, checking locks, changing security code. If you are in a situation after you're able to get the abuser removed from that shared residence, that's a good time to do those types of things to make sure that they can't get back in. And usually that would be after a court order where there's a piece of protective order, and then the person is ordered to leave the home. Confirm you have sufficient outdoor lighting. This depends, of course, on the specific type of housing. It's not necessarily applicable to some type of apartment buildings or some condo living, but having good outdoor lights can also be a deterrent, and it can help the survivor feel safer. Maybe motion activated lights can alert someone that there's something going on outside. Maybe it can make an potential aggressor feel that people can see them, or make them think about how people around them might notice what's going on. If there's good lighting or motion activated motion sensor lighting. Make an escape plan. This is related to the first point, but we encourage survivors to think about where they would go if they needed to escape, and to make a plan for that. If they have children, make sure that they know the children, if it's appropriate for their age, that they know the plan, and that they can practice it, maybe. Excuse me. Prepare an escape pack. So if a survivor thinks that they might want to leave their abuser, or they're anticipating, they think it's possible that someone could come to their home and try to do something to them, they might consider packing a bag with important things that they might need. I've heard it called a go bag. So stuff that they might need if they had to quickly leave their home. And this can include changes of clothes for a few days, but also any important documents, IDs, insurance cards, medical documents, passports, bank information, stuff like that. Also prescription medications, if they need to take medications, what's the word, routinely or periodically. They should probably have that. And that bag can be stored somewhere safe in the house, on where they can grab it on their way out, or that can be stored even at the safe location outside of the home with a neighbor or a trusted friend or a relative, somewhere to keep safe away from the perpetrator. Ask trusted neighbors for assistance to call police if they see a perpetrator at the house. So neighbors, if you have a good relationship with them, that can be a very good resource, because they're right there. And maybe if they have a good relationship, or if they're just nice, decent people who want you to be okay, they can be a good resource. And they have a stake in wanting to promote a good physical environment around their home. So they want the peace also. So in addition to the things on this slide, when I was thinking about this, I read in a coworker's notes that a survivor can also prepare an excuse ahead of time to be able to leave the house. So they can try to come up with different plausible reasons why they might need to leave at different times or in different situations, so that when the day comes that something happens or they're trying to leave, they have a totally reasonable explanation for, they have somewhere to go, and they can use that to get away from the perpetrator. And this will, depend, of course, on the type of relationship that they have, or the type of um, home environment that it is. But something to think about sometimes. Another cool idea that I read was that um, a survivor can choose maybe to sleep in, if there's a in a house, in a more public part of the house, instead of a bedroom, so that way more people could potentially witness or hear any attempts, um, which again could be a deterrent for a perpetrator. I've heard of people hanging bells and jingles on their door to also act as an alarm to alert people around them, um, and to deter an abuser. Um, Another thing, worst case scenario, but if a survivor finds themselves trapped in a room with the perpetrator on the other side, um, they can move heavy objects against the door from the inside and sort of barricade themselves, with furniture while they wait for help to arrive. And I don't know, it sounds implausible a little bit, but I had a client who actually did that. Um, yeah, otherwise I almost wouldn't believe it myself. But yeah, these are options at home. So how about outside the home? Um, in terms of safety outside the home, things we might suggest could be um, changing regular travel habits. This can make it harder for a perpetrator to anticipate a victim's moves, so that they wouldn't be able to intercept them as easily or run into them casually and disrupt their day. Um, Travel with others whenever possible. This is one of the first things that people think of. I found, um, when I'm discussing safety planning. A lot of the times, people are already putting this into practice, um, and it really helps people feel safe when that option is available. The buddy system, a friend, a family member, maybe a coworker will, after their shift, walk them back to their vehicle, or walk with them to the job, or take a lunch break with them. Being with others, having a witness, um, can be a powerful deterrent. It, I find it's probably the first thing that people do. Um, but if they don't, I would discuss it, help them think about um, what their options would be in that regard. So change where they do their banking, grocery shopping, and similar, type of activities. Um, Changing it up can make it harder to predict where a survivor is going to be. It's harder to casually run into them. Um, Cancel any shared accounts. Anytime a survivor uses the joint credit card or the shared account, they may be inadvertently sharing information about themselves or about their location, with the abuser. So this one's very important. And depending on the person, they may have already thought about that, or it can be helpful to bring it up and to remind them and to discuss. Um, so in general, it can make survivors safer if they become harder to trace, harder to track, and if they can make their moves harder to predict. Changing habits, switching it up, um, switching up the places and the schedules, the times of day that they're doing different things, can be effective in that way. Um, Okay. The workplace. Some things we might suggest here can be providing a picture of the perpetrator to security or colleagues, trusted colleagues. These examples, make sense in the case where the abuser or perpetrator is not a coworker or not someone that they already know in the work site. But yeah, talk to a supervisor, talk about what they can do to make it more difficult to find the survivor. This may depend on the type of workplace, but in some places, if there's a depending on what someone does for a living, their face or name might be on a website, and they can ask that be removed to make it less apparent where to find them. Another thing that comes to mind that a supervisor could do actually is help relocate the actual work area or the task, the physical space that the person is doing at their job. Maybe they can be moved to a more hidden away section of the workspace, or they can be placed working with somebody that makes them feel safe, a coworker that they trust that makes them feel safe. Then request that security walk them to their vehicle. That depending on their workplace, that may be an option, depending on what they do for work and what type of physical place they work in. Again, if it's not security, a friend or a trusted coworker can be helpful for this as well. And save any voicemails that they leave at the workplace. That's if that is happening, that can be very, very useful potentially for to use in legal for legal actions, legal options later on, or investigations. So save those. Campus. So another unique setting with unique circumstances and challenges can be the college campus. The following tips for people are for people on campuses. First, we want to talk about taking different routes to class. So a variation of the theme from earlier, but making the survivor making themselves harder to trace and making their moves harder to predict. Know your resources on campus and off campus. Who like trying to work with the person on figuring out who would they contact if they or if a friend needed help, where would they go? Know where their campus health center is, the police station, the sexual assault crisis center. Maybe that could be off campus. Are there emergency counseling service or psychological mental health services available? What's the number for campus security? Have that saved on their phone. If there's concerns about privacy, they can also figure out if they don't want to, seek services on campus because of privacy concerns. They can also try to get connected with off-campus services in the surrounding town or county or community, because we have police departments and rape crisis centers, and we have Sally, and we have all these type of things off campus as well. Campus security, utilize campus security. Depending on the school, some campuses may have more or less sophisticated campus security. Some campuses will offer rights to people, give a right to their dorm or their home after from the library or something like that. If they feel unsafe, because of a perpetrator or just not feel safe walking through campus at night or something. Request changes to schedule or housing. This can be done by talking to an administrator, a dean, or something like that. Have backup plans. Think about plan Bs for potential bad situations. Um, do you know your campus address? Do you have that memorized? Do you carry cash in case something happens to your phone or your card? Um, if you didn't have your phone, is there anyone you can call? Do you have any phone numbers that you have memorized? And increasingly, this is a challenge for people. I still know a couple of phone numbers from memory, but that can be if somebody is concerned about their safety, that's a good thing to um, put into effect. Um, if they have a card, do they have a spare key? It's another one. Now, mentally, this is a concern, something that colleges have been discussing, but be mindful of victim blaming. So partying, alcohol, that's a big part of the social culture on college campuses. Um, on the one hand, it's good to know where your limits are when it comes to drinking, so that a survivor can tell if something feels off. Or they can if they've been drugged, they can feel like, oh, I should not be feeling this from a couple of drinks. I've seen, unfortunately, we've seen that type of thing um, in our cases where somebody put something in their drink and trying to take advantage of someone. Um, so do try to um, b- people should try to protect themselves, protect their drink, not drink something that they don't know where it came from. On the other hand, they're someone's a victim's or survivor's drug use or alcohol use or partying is sometimes abusers can try to use that to smear their character, make them seem unworthy of sympathy. Um, so I would encourage people to try to be discerning about their social curate their friend groups and their social environment, so that they're not putting themselves in situations where they might be victim blamed for something that someone else chose to do to them. um, Now give me a moment, I need to plug in my charger. I will be back in 30 seconds. There we go. Sorry about that. Thanks for bearing with me. um yeah, so that was campus. uh we have some safety plan tips for people with children. In an ideal world, we wouldn't need to do that, but in reality, it can be helpful to give kids some tools. So, first of all, as soon as a kid is old enough to do this, teach them to call 911, give police their phone number and the address. So, actually, first of all, as soon as they're old enough, have them memorize their address and their parents' phone number, um, so that they can do that. If in case of emergency, it becomes necessary. Teach them who to call for help. Um, So 911, or it can also be trusted friends, family members, someone that the child can talk to, and that the parent will trust to be a safety resource in a situation. Make sure they know who to go to if they see an abuser at school. Uh, this may vary depending on the school and the setting, but usually a trusted adult staff member or a teacher. And make sure the school staff knows not to give their name or their phone number to anyone. I mean, the abuser or the child's information. And this can come up in cases where there's a child sex abuse, or there's a domestic violence situation with children in common. Sometimes we can get a protective order against someone that includes protection for the children, and we would then have survivors provide a copy of that order to the school administration so that they know that the abuser and co-parent is not allowed to come pick up the kids after school or something, or any time of the day, I guess, not necessarily after school. That they can't just come and have access to the child. That has been court ordered. Yeah. So preparing for an emergency, in case a person is not prepared, in case they don't have a cell phone, get a cell phone, have it that they can keep charged and on their person at all times. If they don't have one, sometimes I know some domestic violence organizations or rape crisis centers may be able to help people get a phone, a safe cell phone device. Also, if possible, keep chargers on their person, on their bag, or at work, in the car, at home, wherever. That can be helpful. Have emergency contacts saved on the phone that they can access. I talked about this earlier also, but memorizing phone numbers can be helpful in case they don't have the device on them. Emergency services or a trusted friend or family member can be good phone numbers to memorize. Of course, everybody knows 911. And in some situations, they can even come up with a secret phrase, a secret code word that they can use to discreetly signal to a friend. Like if the abuser is around, they can still call a friend and say this innocuous sounding thing that will let a friend know that they're in a crisis or that they need help. So that's another sneaky trick that one can develop if need be. Now, emotional safety, that's another key component. And in our conversations with the survivor during safety planning, one can get a sense of what is their social safety net like and their support network. Important things to know include who else knows about the assault and who can you reach out to if needed. And refer them to their local crisis center for support. So having somebody on your side, having someone to go to, greatly increases protective factors in many ways. We've talked about some ways that other people can be incredibly helpful for someone's safety, in addition to having a friend to go somewhere with them to feel physically safe, like to a buddy to go to the store or something, or walk to class. The emotional support that they can provide is also very important. and rape crisis centers can offer counseling services and other. They might have group therapies and other programs that they can help address the neurobiological effects of trauma. They're more qualified than I am to do this sort of thing, but sometimes, working on somatic practices can be part of helping somebody feel physically more grounded and maintaining, keeping their body working for them and healing and being able to function in cases of very stressful, very stressful times. And that somatic practices that can mean, breathing exercises and mindfulness and that sort of thing. Now, let's talk about stalking. Let's talk about cyber stalking first. Let's talk about stalking, defining what the stalking in Maryland. Stalking is a crime. A persistent and malicious pattern of approaching or pursuing someone to make that person feel afraid that they or someone else will suffer serious bodily injury, assault, rape, or sexual offense, false imprisonments or death, or the stalker intends to knows or should know that this conduct will cause serious emotional distress to another person. And below you can see some statistics about how common that is. 1 in 6 women, 1 in 19 men are stalked at some point during their lifetime. And what about cyber stalking? Unwanted advances or threatening behavior directed to someone using the internet or other forms of online communications. So, severity. How bad is it? 21% of women ages 18 to 29 report being sexually harassed online. 53% of women ages 18 to 29 say that someone has sent them explicit images without their consent. Excuse me. Stalking on social media, what does that look like? It can be following or sending friend requests to someone to track their status updates or to track their activities. It can be keeping track of someone's GPS check-ins or location check-ins. This is now widely established and almost like ancient technology at this point, but Facebook, Instagram, that sort of thing now will allow people and encourage people to share where they're at when they post something and tag a location. So that's something that a stalker can use. Sending harassing or threatening messages, self-explanatory. Making fake profiles to track someone. So if someone, a survivor can block an abuser or restrict their access to information, an abuser might be able to still gain access through that if they can trick someone into accepting a friend request from a profile that looks like someone else that's not themselves. So we would encourage people to not accept requests from strangers or profiles that look fake. Stalking on social media can be posting anonymous abuse, posting false or defamatory information, or posting nude images or other sexual content of the victim without their consent. So let's look at risk assessment when it comes to the internet and social media use. When we talk to survivors, these are some things that we might think about when talking about safety planning regarding technology used? Does the perpetrator know their phone number or email? Do they know any of your passwords? Do you have social media accounts? Obviously, if they know any passwords, the first thing to do is to change those. They can be sometimes necessary to change phone numbers, change email address, change social media accounts. Do you share any social media accounts with the perpetrator? There may be a person might have to stop using that or change the passwords, change the information, lock the other person out, so that they're not inadvertently sharing information about themselves through their activity on the shared account. Are you friends with or connected, depending on the type of network of service platform that we're talking about, with the perpetrator? Because if so, they may be sharing information about their location or their activities, or even they take a selfie and you can see in the background recognizable landmarks or other objects that can tell someone, the survivor's location. So we also tell people to think about that. Or even if they get tagged by someone else in a photo. So is anyone in your network friends with the perpetrator? So the survivor themselves might not be sharing information directly, but maybe their friend or I don't know, their mutual friend takes a picture, posts it. You can see where they are. They maybe tag their location, and the friends who posted that, maybe their settings are not, their privacy settings are not very strict. That might give anyone, including an abuser, information about a survivor's location or activities. Have they contacted you since the assault? Sometimes they do. Sometimes we've had threads of DMs on Facebook that we have been able to grab screenshots of that and bring to court for cases. But then, of course, you want to block the person and not leave that communication channel open. Just grab those messages and prevent further abuse. Has the perpetrator posted anything about you online? And what was it? And is it still online? If it is, you would want to again grab a screenshot, grab that evidence, and it's just good to know what the abuser is doing. And privacy settings, of course, I have alluded to that already when discussing the above points, but I always tell people during safety planning to look at their privacy settings on any information on any type of service or account that they use. Clients under 35, let's say, it's a lot of people use Snapchat, and unfortunately, by default, Snapchat shares the user's location. You can go in there and privacy settings and change that. But if you don't do that, by default, everyone you're friends with, everyone you're connected with on Snapchat gets to see your phone's GPS location. I've no I've never used but I've heard that this app, Be Real, also does that, and I've been told that you can also go in and change that. But in general, any service that shares location in any way, or that shares any information, even Facebook or whatever, it's a good idea to review what the privacy settings are set to make sure they're not exposing themselves in any way to any further harm or abuse after when there's any concerns about safety. So when using social networking sites or using the apps, we encourage people to not share information about their home, their work, their school, their childcare accommodations, their where they're going shopping, social plans, methods of transportation, or any aspect of their location or their habits. Um, and this is not, again, I've been saying this a lot, but it's not only the what they write, but it's also what you see in the background of their photos or what their friends or someone else posts about them. So it can be good to have that conversation with um, the people that you're with, if that is safe to do, or if that is appropriate. So not do not accept requests to connect with people you don't recognize. Um, it can be a fake profile or some way to get information, some way that the abuser or perpetrator is using to get information. Block them, block the abuser on all shared social media platforms. Um, anyone who might be friends with him or with the abuser, who might share information with them, who might um, give them any um, details about the survivors, updates or activities, should also be to have their privacy settings. They're severely restricted, if not get blocked completely. Consider removing profile pictures or using some other image, like I don't know, I've seen like a field of flowers or some trees or something like that. Nondescript image that doesn't say whose profile that is. And reviewing, like I've been saying, reviewing privacy and security settings for every profile on every platform, every account. Taking the time to review how other people see the profile. Facebook, I think, at least it used to allow you to see how your profile looks to so and so person, and how it looks to the public. So it's also a good idea to assume any information that someone publishes online, one should assume can always forever be permanently accessible by everyone. You never know, somebody grabs a screenshot, saves it, and it can be shared in some way. People share stuff. So I tell people to not post anything that they wouldn't want in any way accidentally to get to an abuser or to whoever, that they wouldn't want to be seen. Um, Now, here's some recommendations specifically for Twitter, which is now called X, I think, and some people use. I have never been a Twitter user, but of course, creating a good, strong password and login verification should be enabled um, to make sure that no one is accessing that account. Um, Third-party apps, people can those can be used to take out information about the account or about the person. Um, and shortened URLs can sometimes be links to phishing um, phishing websites that are trying to again steal information about the user. So those were some tips specifically for Twitter. Um, Here we have some Facebook specific considerations. It's important to keep in mind that there's a lot of fake accounts on Facebook. It says here Facebook estimates up to 4% of accounts that sometimes it seems like it's even more. Um, and yeah, be people should be mindful of how that can be used to get information about them, fake profiles. And as we have seen, Facebook has seen, women are a lot more likely to be harassed and to experience abuse on Facebook. Um, Now, Snapchat and Instagram. same things apply, same general principles. Delete identifying information from pictures. That can be stuff in the background. It can be stuff on the profile pictures. Don't use real information when signing up. Those are services that aren't really that I don't know, straight or professional. So people use nicknames and pen names and just their online handles a lot. So no need to use your real information. And they have block features if somebody's harassing or abusing. Um, Now, in the workplace, technology harassment is unfortunately pretty common. One in three young women has been sexually harassed at work. Uh, Often 25% of them via text or email, and it is often not reported. So unfortunately, these tools are commonly misused for that type of thing. Um, some safety tips when using technology and the internet: periodically change passwords, um, especially if there's been any shared devices. That can be a concern that someone could have been getting passwords, recording passwords. Um, so in order to, again, related to using shared devices, um, private browsing options. Most web browsers have some kind of private browsing mode, incognito in Google Chrome, or private browsing in Firefox, etc. That's so that a user of a shared device would not have access to the survivor's um, browsing history and activity. If they're seeking help or something, that way it won't give off any clues. Delete any old accounts. No need to have that for the survivor to abuse or misuse. I mean, for the abuser to misuse. I mentioned this earlier, but setting boundaries with family and friends about tagging. Friends and family posting group photos or um, checking in at locations or tagging people or something that can, or even if they don't tag, if the mutual friend posts something on Instagram and it gets shown to the abuser, even if the person is not tagged, the survivor is not tagged, they will still be visible to someone else. So um, that can be a weak link in someone's online safety or security strategy. So talking to friends and family about that um, can be important. Um, to preserve safety and privacy. Um, do not open suspicious messages or emails. Um, Most services these days I find are um, getting very smart about filtering those out, so they go straight to a spam folder or something. But that can be one way to trick someone into clicking a link and providing their logging information um, on a website that looks safe enough. So careful with that. Track unwanted calls, text messages, and voicemails. Um, if anything, it can be useful for investigations and legal actions. Um, Now, spyware. Unfortunately, it is now pretty accessible, even for regular users, for regular people that are not, advanced computer hackers or computer users. Um, Spyware technology um, is accessible. It can be now purchased for $40, something like that. And this, together with the anonymity of the internet, it can make it easy to cyber stalk. Um, if someone sometimes during safety planning, we might find that someone is feeling that their devices are being tampered with, that they're being that they're feeding information to an abuser who, for no apparent reason, knows where they're going to be, or stuff like that. So things to look out for that may give off that the device has been infected with spyware can be battery drain. It's making noises randomly. It'll start up or shut down. Getting odd text messages, or there's higher data usage than regular. That can be the phone sending data somewhere in the background, not in a way that's not apparent to the user. And all these things don't necessarily mean that there is spyware, but they can be clues that sort of thing is happening. And down there you can see on the slide, that's from one of these software platforms available to people to hire some kind of spyware service. So this is something that unfortunately we see in domestic violence cases, or where an abuser may have had access to the survivor's phone or computer, or their device, or they successfully got the person to enter their information in a phishing website. So another thing to think about in terms of privacy is explanation of benefits that health insurance providers will send to the person who pays for the insurance, the person named in the policy. And now we're moving, on completely from cyber stalking, but one final consideration. If a survivor is getting their health insurance through their abuser, be it a parent or a partner, the state of Maryland does have a request for confidential communications. It's a document that lets the insured person, the patient, choose who their health information gets sent to after a healthcare visit. So they can ask that be sent to a different address, that be sent through a different means that only the survivor will see. So and that's helpful when, again, if that information is given to the abuser, the person paying for the insurance, that would put the survivor in danger. And below I have the links for these forms. It's available in English and in Spanish. So I just wanted to let you know that is also available. And the if a person doesn't do that, by default, their health information will be sent to the person who is paying for the insurance. This only applies to messages from the insurance company, not necessarily things from the provider, and it doesn't carry over from one insurance company to another. They have to notify anytime they change insurance companies. It's probably good practice to check in with the company to make sure that they have processed and approved this request to not share that information. Until that has been approved, the company may continue sending that information to the person who's paying for the account. And depending on the company, that may require they may require written request, or it can be done over the phone or email. Yeah, so that's that. And to summarize my thoughts on safety planning, in general, consider who you're working with and listen to them. Consider their identities and their circumstances. Prioritize immediate safety. Create a detailed plan and use any available support and resources, and be mindful of the dangers of social media and the internet. I have some additional tips below. It can be helpful for the client to take notes during this conversation of things that they want to put into action or things they want to remember later on. Definitely helps with retention, I think. Can be helpful to review the final plan together if a survivor wants to do that. I don't want to be pushing safety planning on people. A lot of time they don't necessarily feel that they need a thorough discussion. Sometimes it's just reviewing quickly the dangers of the internet. I always tell people that, or like, their immediate physical surroundings. But if there's a detailed plan, it can be helpful to review that at the end. And we can email someone a list of resources, contacts. We have a list of tips and things to consider when safety planning, a guide that we email people. So that's that. And that's my contact information and contact information for our office and our organization. If you come into contact with survivors, clients who may need to speak with an attorney or may need to get connected with their local crisis center or may need to, consult about their case, please feel free to put them in contact with us, and they can ask for me or they can talk to any of our advocates, and we will get them through our intake process and get them started with accessing legal services. So yeah, that's all. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you for that presentation. We have one question for you in the chat. It says, does in Maryland exist something similar to the Ley Olympia in Mexico?
I don't know what the Ley Olympia is.
Okay.
Sounds like I should. Sounds cool.
All right.
And I'm not an attorney, so I also, but I might know. I might know something.
Okay,
If I
maybe
knew what the Ley Olympia
if the
was.
person who put this in could just elaborate a little more on what that is so we can get an answer to you.
I'm gonna try to quickly look it up myself.
Okay, cool. In the meantime, I put the evaluation form in the chat. So for anyone else who needs that, you can go ahead and fill that out there. And do you know what it is?
So it makes it a crime to record sexual content without consent. I have to be honest, I don't know the answer to that.
So
I
I can
believe
answer that,
yes.
Juan Luis.
Yes.
So there is a wiretap law in the state of Maryland that makes it a crime to videotape anyone without their consent, where it has audio recording. So that it may fall under that, depending on what the recording is specifically. And then there's certainly also, any kind of release of, those images would fall under, most likely fall under revenge pornography.
Great, thank you. So if anyone else has any other questions, go ahead and put that in the chat. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow. And you can expect an email from me with the evaluation link, a copy of this recording, and the slides for today's presentation. You'll get that tomorrow morning. Thank you.